let's get started here. Let me see how sound is. I'm having trouble with sound on these. Test, test. How's the sound? It works. Alright, today we're going to go through a set of labs that I put together to work through some domain-driven design patterns and concepts. We're going to use Visual Studio 2019. We're going to have this running on .NET Core 3.0. We can upgrade to 3.1 pretty easily if we want. We're going to want to use some kind of a tool for inspecting API endpoints like Postman or Fiddler. And we're also going to be looking at something that can capture emails, SMTP for dev or Papercut or something similar. There's actually a Docker tool I'll probably try out, which is available here. So our first instructions here are that we want to download this clean architecture template, clone it to your machine. You can fork it first if you want. So let me open up Chatty so I can see if anyone's asking questions. Close, connect. Anybody here yet? It doesn't look like it. Stream Elements is here. Yay. Alright. So mostly I'm just talking to the people that are here on YouTube later. That's fine. Yeah, so we're going to copy this. So we'll hit that link, which brings us here. And this is my clean architecture repo on GitHub. Specifically going to this .NET Core 3.0 one just so it's a fixed starting point for the lab. And I'm going to clone or download this, so we'll just copy that and we'll jump to PowerShell. And I have a folder that's just in my Scratch directory where I can put this. We'll clone clean architecture. Hey, Surly Dev. Alright, so now we've got the app cloned down so we can work on it. You should be able to run the application, just do .NET Store, .NET Run from the web project folder, so let's try that. We're going to go into the folder we just cloned, and we'll go to the source folder, go to the web folder, and let's do a .NET Run and see what we get. I was hoping it would go a little faster than this. What are you doing, .NET? There you go. Alright, so 57679, it's listening on. So let's go there. I don't need this anymore. Alright, so this looks basically like what we see here. So we can load the sample to do items, see them here. It's actually duplicating them, but here's the steps we want to do. Get the sample to build, we did that. Review the solution, we haven't done that yet. Run and review the tests. Alright, well it's going to tell us to do that here in a second. So down here at the bottom of lab 0, it tells us you should be able to run the test in the test folder, either from a command line or a test runner within your IDE. Go and run .NET test. Alright, so if you want to follow along with this, let me go ahead and throw this into the chat just so folks have it. I don't have the lab manual available. I'm not sharing that everywhere widely, so if you're watching and following along quickly, you can follow with what I'm doing, but if you want to run through it yourself, then you need to come to one of my workshops. At least that's the deal for now. There is an old version of it that you can find on my DDD guestbook repo. So if you go to Ardalis/DDD-guestbook, you'll find an old version of the lab we're about to do. All right, so there. If anyone wants to follow along, that's what you got. We're going to rename our solution DDD-guestbook.solution. I'll do that here. And clean architecture is now going to be DDD guestbook. All right. So we are ready to open that up. I'll just double click on it, I guess. Happy New Year, Surly Dev. Has it really been since the new year that I've been streaming? Or I haven't streamed this year, I guess is another way to say that. That might be true. Alright, now we can run the tests. That's what I was going to do. We can run the tests from here as well. So we can kill the web server and back out to the test folder. Twitchloff, thanks. Yeah, feel free to use this template if you like, or fork it and modify it to suit yourselves. That's what it's there for. Alright, you know what, actually, I'm just going to run all the tests from this solution. That's what I wanted to do. So up here, DDD-guestbook.solution, we can just run .NET test, and it should run all the tests. This again is just verifying that things are working. And you see in the background I've got Visual Studio up. I'm about to run them there too. So, boom, test, pass. Right. So there's not a ton of tests yet, but you can see 5 passed, 3 passed, 3 passed. Likewise, same deal here. You can run them, and they're pretty quick, and they should work. The whole idea of this template is that it's got working tests for it when you start, and then you can use those tests as templates or examples for your own tests. All right, so what are we building? Well, this guestbook lab, the idea of it is that we're going to create a page that people can just come to and leave a message on the guestbook. Think of it like Facebook Lite. So it doesn't have any authentication, doesn't have any login stuff, but you can go in there and you can just leave a message, and other people can see that message if they come to that page. The idea behind it is that it's a fairly simple domain, but it has enough moving parts, and we'll add a little bit of business rules to it that applying some domain-driven design logic and patterns can make sense, right? It's not just a CRUD application. So here's the requirements. Anonymous users can view entries. Later on, we'll let them leave messages. So we're going to start it with initially, we're just going to display some stuff. So it's going to be pretty trivial for this first part of the lab. Each guestbook entry has to have the user's email address, the message, as well as the date time it was created, and we'll add more behavior later. So the homepage should display the most recent 10 entries, order them by when the entry was recorded, so we see the most recent ones at the top, and for now we're just going to hard code some stuff. All right, Bite Me 7, dev better in the house. Yeah, cool. Who are you? Who's Bite Me 7? I don't know you, or I've forgotten who Bite Me 7 is in real life. Code Stencil, greetings. Alright, so here's the details of this lab. We're going to create some entities. Alright, we need a guestbook entry. Down here is kind of what they might look like. Entity should go in core in the entities folder. Ah, hey Jason Lee. Guestbook needs a name, should have a list of guestbook entries. Guestbook entry should have these things. Alright, so let's code that up real quick. So we come in here, go in core, go in entities, right here. We'll just start on this class right here. Public class guestbook needs to have a public int ID. Get set needs to have a public string name. Get set, and it's going to need some guestbook entries. And that's going to need a public int ID get set, or maybe it doesn't need an ID actually. I think I'm going to inherit from base entity, so let me skip that part. Yeah, base entity is going to have the ID, so ditch that. This needs instead email address and message. So string email address, you need to have base entity, and you need to have base entity, and then this should have a list of guestbook entries. We'll call that entries. Now there's a bunch of stuff I'm not doing quote unquote the right way here. You know, for instance, I'm giving a getter and a setter to a list collection. We're going to fix that later. But for now, that's good enough. All right, so this needs to also have a message and a date created. All right. Date time created. Fine. Hey, Copperbeardy. Alright, so these need to go in their own files. And the reason why I created them on to-do item first is because it's just way faster than going through here and adding the class and using the mouse and all that I've found. So I usually just find something that's in the folder and add it to there, and then when I'm done, just Control Dot to move it to its own file. Alright, so I think I'm done. I needed to create a guestbook. Guestbook should have a name. Guestbook should have a list of guestbook entry. And guestbook entry should have an email address, a message, and date time offset. And it should look kind of like this, although I could certainly new up that list. So let's do that. This doesn't really need a setter. It could just be list. Like, avoid some null reference exceptions later. Alright. Don't forget to initialize your properties to list to avoid null reference exceptions later, he just said. Alright. Now, the home page is going to display the guestbook name and up to 10 entries. So create a homepage view model in view models and include some properties. Guestbook name, previous entries. Alright. So I don't have a view models folder necessarily, so I need to create one. The instructions said to do that. Add new folder, view models. Now we could use like feature folders or something. And here I do need to add a class because there's nothing else here yet. What do I want to call that? Homepage view model? Yeah, that sounds good. Alright. And this needs just a guestbook name and previous entries. Sounds good. That, and then this just needs to be pulling in that namespace, and we can clean these up. We're good with that. Alright, so that's done. Home controller index should create a new guestbook, so this is inside the controller, and add some entries to it, and we'll just hard code them. Create a homepage view model from it, and then return the view. Okay, so let's go look at our controller. So home controller index, this is our home page, and on the home page we want to display the most recent entries on the guestbook. So we're going to just hard code this up right now, and we're going to follow basically make it work, make it right as our mantra here. So initially we're just coding things up right in place, later we'll refactor it and clean it up. So we're going to create a guestbook here, equals new guestbook. Alright, and then guestbook needs some entries. And the entries need some email addresses and some messages and a date time created. They should be at some point in the past because they were created a while ago. Alright, so here's one that was happening an hour ago. And will be test 2, and this will be hello. This will be 2 hours ago. And we'll just do one more. 3, sup. And we could say 3 hours ago. Alright. So now we have our model. Now we want to create a view model from that. So we're going to say var view model equals new homepage view model. And it needs a guestbook name. Now this guy needed a name also. And we'll do a Ardalis guestbook with that. And this can just be guestbook name equals guestbook.name, comma, previous entries equals guestbook dot. Can I just set that? I think I can. Yeah, that's alright. Previous entries equal guestbook dot entries. Sometimes I want to use an add range to get that in there, but I think it's okay like that for now. And we want to pass the view model to the view. Egypt. I've not been to Egypt. I haven't even made it to Africa. That's one of the continents I want to get to. Welcome, Abdu Mustafa. Alright, let's go back to our instructions. Home controller index should create a new guestbook. My guestbook. Yeah, I named it my own thing. Add some entries to it. Create a homepage view model. Return a view. Passing a view model to the view. Yep. Alright. Now we're ready to go to the index.cshtml file and modify it to use this type and then display stuff. Alright, so we're going to go into our views and find our home index view. And at some point I should save. And we'll just say here, this will be our Dallas guestbook, but also at model. That. Alright, now we don't want really any of this other stuff. Nuke all of that. And I have a sample of what the view might look like here. And it looks pretty much like that. So H2 for the guestbook. I don't know why I didn't start with an H1, but model.guestbook name. H3 entries. Right? Messages. Fine. Messages. What's the name of the framework that allows you to write 3.hours.ago? Is that Nota time? It sounds like Nota time. Or at least it sounds like something Nota time would have. Twitchloff. Alright, so we're using an ordered list of class round. I don't think I can copy paste this. I think this is an image. Yeah, so I'm going to throw this on my other monitor real quick so I can just type it out. Yeah, so we say if there aren't any messages, we want to display something different. So if at model dot previous entries dot any, meaning there are none, then we're going to do li class equals 0. Otherwise, otherwise we're going to for each over. We don't really need an else block because the for each is going to go over an empty list if it's got nothing. So we can just do the for each directly here. For entry in model dot previous entries dot. Let's order them here. So remember, we want the most recent on top. E dot date time creative. That should do the trick. And now for each entry, we just want to display the person that did it. So at entry.email address, when they did it, when they left the message. This should be inside the H5. So right here, we're going to demonstrate how well Razor can tell the difference between HTML and C#. Entry.datetime created. Good. And we just want the message. Alright. And then this I think needs to be that. And that's why that's there. Alright. 1, 2, 1, 2, okay. See if that builds. And then run the app. You should see 3 messages on the home page, most recent on top. Alright, so let's do that. Let's make sure web is our startup project. It's not. And control F5. Did anybody verify if it was Nota time? Twitch Love? Is that the right answer? Are you quizzing me? Okay, so here we go. So 1/24/2020. Hey, that's today. The most recent one is on top. Good, so that worked. We are done with Lab 1. Let's move on to Lab 2. So Lab 2 is adding entries. So we want to add a form to the page, allow users to add new entries to the guestbook. Expected time to complete 30 minutes, but I'm hoping I'll be faster. Alright, so we can display the 10 most recent entries now from persistence, and this is going to use a repository. For now, there's only ever one instance of guestbook, so we're just going to load the one and only hard-coded guestbook. If there isn't one, we're going to create one when the homepage loads. So we're going to add a form that accepts the email message and the message. We're going to post it directly back to the index controller, and we're going to add a new method, an action method on the controller that'll handle that post. Clean architecture already includes the iRepository, EF repository implementation, so we don't need to write up a repository. It's built into our template we're starting from. And we can see an example of it in the to-do controller if we need some sample code. So follow that example to pass an iRepository into home controller's constructor and assign it to a private local field. It's going to look like what you see down here at the bottom of the screen. Now we need to determine if there's already a guestbook in persistence, and if not, we're going to create and save one in this method. And we can just create it with some test entries if we want, so that it will have some test data when we first get it. Alright, so what that code's going to look like is something like this. We're going to say if our repository list all the guestbooks, if we had .any, if that's not there, that means there are no guestbooks in persistence, then we're going to new up a guestbook and add these things. So we're just going to take our code we already wrote, put it inside this if block, and then we'll add it to persistence using this add method. And then, you know, if we already had a guestbook, we'll skip this whole block. So then we're going to get the guestbook with ID 1. We're just hard coding that for now, for the purpose of the lab. And then we're going to do the same work we did before with setting up the view model. All right, so basically we just need to do this logic right here. And inject the repository. All right, so let's look at the repository real quick while we're here. So there's a to-do controller, has this repository, and in here it has this list of to-do item. Now this repository is generic, but in this particular case the pattern is being applied so it's generic at the method level, not at the type level. So you notice this is not an iRepository of to-do item, it's just an iRepository. But its list method is of type to-do item. And so that's maybe different than how you've implemented repositories before, perhaps. Alright, so that's really all we need. We just need this bit copied over into home controller. Yeah, and then we need to do our check to see if it has any. So let's do a namespace there. Let's add our if statement. Let's do a fancy wrap this in an if statement. Can I do that? No, it's going to want to extract a method. Alright, fine. That's not what I want. Alright, so we'll say if underscore repository dot list of type guestbook dot any. Now if I wanted to be more efficient about this, I could probably write a exists method on my repository to see if guestbook exists, but this works fine. Alright, so if not any, throw that on there, then we're going to create a guestbook here, and then we're going to save that thing. So we're going to do repository dot, and I'm going to change the name on this. I'll do that in a second. So repository dot add guestbook. All right. Now let's rename this. tube binding, but apparently I don't. Oh wait, let's fix this too over here. There we go. Alright, so we need to rename this, and I want to call it new guest book. And you'll see why in a second. And now I can do a control dot rename. Good. Alright, so in that scope there's a new guest book. Now down here there's also a guest book. That's because I want my guest book to be repository.getById guest book. And here, yeah, we're going to hard code a 1. Alright, don't do that in real code. Okay, so now we're going to get the guest book, and we're going to set the view model, and everything should be pretty much like it was. So let's go review the lab. Looks pretty similar. Now what we haven't done yet is we haven't told Entity Framework about guestbook, right? We just added that in lab 1, and it has no idea that that thing exists. So we need to go into the EF repository, or sorry, into the EF DB context file, which is here. That's in the infrastructure app.db context class. And we need to add a DB set of guestbook called guestbooks. So that's pretty easy. Just go infrastructure data app.db context. There's already a DB set of to-do items that we can use as our model. And so we'll just copy that, make one for guestbook, call it guestbooks. If we tried to run our code before this point, it would blow up and tell us that EF doesn't know about this thing. Alright. Back to our lab. Migrations. We need to use migrations to configure SQLite database. So in this case, I'm not using an in-memory database. There's challenges with that. I've used to use it in the lab, but it was painful. So we're using SQLite for our persistence. To make all this work with this new model that we're creating, we want to delete the existing database.sqlite file, which should be in the web project. So if we go in here and we say, show me all the files, there might be one in here. What is it called? Database.sqlite? I'm not sure I even have one yet. Oh, no, there it is. Bam, database.sqlite. So delete that. Alright. And then run this command to create an initial migration. So copy all that from a command prompt in the web project folder. That's important. So I need to come here and change directory to source, change directory to the web project. Now I'm in the right place. I can paste this. And let's just walk through what this is doing. We'll do it from here before I run it. So this says .NET EF. This is Entity Framework. Migrations, add, initial model, that's just a label. Context, this is just telling it which DB context to use. I'm not even sure I need that because I think I only have one DB context, but sometimes you'll have more than one, so it's good to specify. -P is which project do we want the migration to go in, and so I'm going to give it the path to my infrastructure project. -S is where do I want to find the settings, so the database connection string, things like that. So that's in the web project, which is right here in the folder I'm in. And then -O, data/migrations, that's where in there where I want the output. So what I expect to happen when I run this is over here in infrastructure, under data, I'm going to find the migrations folder if everything goes according to plan. Alright, so let's run this. And it doesn't like that I have multiple lines, so that's my problem. So I might have to do a better job of copy pasting. So we do this, and then we say, you know what, let's open up Notepad. Notepad to the rescue. We'll paste this in here and get rid of these new lines. Alright, so now it's all in one line, because PowerShell doesn't like the line wraps. And then paste that in there. That's better. Let's see what that does. There it goes, says done. Alright, everything seems to have worked. Let's go look at Visual Studio now. We have a migrations folder. What did it give us? Well, it gave us this initial model, and this gives us an up. So this is to migrate up to this version. It's got a timestamp with today's date time. And here it's going to create a table called guest books, which I would rather be called guest book. You can modify EF to use whatever convention you want for table names. I prefer singular, but apparently it's defaulting to plural. It's also creating to-do items. It's also creating guestbook entry. It's specifying keys. There's primary keys and foreign keys and all that good stuff. So SQLite now is going to have that data in there. Once I run the migration, now it's just creating the migration, doesn't actually do anything with the database. So let's go back to here. The next one is to apply the migration. We're going to run this. It's just basically .NET EF database update. So you do migrations add, and then database update are the two commands that we're sending to .NET EF. Think of .NET EF as its own command runner. All right, so we're going to take this. We're going to also need to pull its carriage return out. So I'm going to paste it over here and do that. All right, I should probably make a note in the lab that you can't just copy paste it. Well, usually they have a paper printout, so they have to type it in. But all the same. All right, so in here now, same place, paste that. Basically, the parameters are doing exactly what they were before. The only thing that's changed is I get rid of the output, because I'm not outputting anything. And this should create a new SQLite database. And you can see here the commands that it ran. It's doing a create table, etc. You may need to install EF Core. Okay, well I didn't, so I'm good to go there. All right, so one challenge in working with EF Core behind an abstraction like a repository is how to fetch related data. For instance, when I fetch the guestbook, it won't have the guestbook entries by default typically. So if I want to include those, I have to give it this .include statement in order to fetch the entries with it. So when we fetch a guestbook, it doesn't include the related entries. To fix this, we'll temporarily modify the interface to allow us to pass in the includes we need. So in the core project, I think that's different. I think I might have to change that. So I don't think it's in core, but let's find out. In wherever it is, in this case, it's probably in shared kernel, repository. There we go. So I'll need to update that. To include this line, get by ID with a string include. All right. And we're going to show a better way to do this later. But for now, we'll do that. Okay, now if we build immediately, it's going to blow up because my repository implementation does not implement this new member. So we're going to come over here and control dot and tell it to implement the interface. And it probably is just going to throw it on the end, which is fine for now. And it's going to say it's not implemented. All right, but I want it to do this. And now I'm okay with carriage returns being copied, so let's just do that. All right, and I don't need that. All right, so what is this doing? This is going to say return dbcontext.set of t, where t is whatever you're saying you want, like a to-do item or a guestbook. And then we're going to include whatever the include string is. Now, this could also be a lambda, but a string works fine. So there's that. All right. Now we just need to tell the repository to include the entries property when we fetch a guestbook by ID. So in our controller, when we fetch the guestbook, we're just going to say guestbook ID and, by the way, include entries. So we need to go back to our controller, our home controller, and right here now we can say entries. And that'll make sure that we fetch the entries along with it. Otherwise, this right here would be null, and our view model wouldn't have any entries in it. All right, so at this point, you should be able to view the home page and your test data. All right, let's try that. Control F5. And it still works. Good. So now this is coming from SQLite. All right, back to the lab. Implement adding stuff. To support adding new entries in an HTML form, I'm going to give you this nice little thing here you can click on to go and copy paste the code for it. So here's our sample code that we need for a form, and update this, include a form between the H2 and the H3 tags. ASPNET Core, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so go to our view. Between these two tags, we're going to add this form. My voice is going. And so a problem here. This form's looking for a new entry. New entry doesn't exist. It's got to be added to my view model. So I suspect that somewhere it's going to tell me to add a new entry property of type guestbook entry to my view model. So let's go find that view model. Let's add a public guestbook entry, new entry. Alright, save that. And now my index should be a little happier. Looks like it is. Alright. Add a new action to do the post. So we need an action result on index that is an HTTP post. And we'll do all those things there. So we're going to implement uploading a new entry. So here, I'm going to have an HTTP post, public action result, add entry, and what are we taking with that? The homepage model? Yep. Homepage view model. And then we want to check if it's if model state dot is valid before we do anything. And if it is, fetch the guestbook, add a new entry to it, update the guestbook, update the model. Okay. Alternately, we could just redirect to index, I think. We'll see. Alright, so var guestbook equals repository.get by ID guestbook hard-coded 1. Alright, probably make a variable or a constant for that. And then we're supposed to say guestbook.entries.add model.newEntry. And that saves it as it goes. I'm not using a unit of work pattern or anything here. And this can just return view, but really I want to just redirect to action, right? Updated the guestbook. So this one says return view. I'm not sure I like that. Why wouldn't I just redirect to the index? That would seem better. But okay, let's do what the lab says. Return view either way. Well, it needs a view model. I guess we'll just assume it's always valid. No, that won't work. What does my code look like here that we're going to do? If that, return view model. Yeah, alright, that works. Fine. We're going to update the actual model that they posted to us. I usually would new one up, but I probably also wanted to do a post redirect get pattern. So, page am I on? Let's see, this is page 6. Make some notes. Post redirect get, and then also page 5. iRepo is in shared kernel. Alright. So basically we just want this. Okay, so model equals, we'll just recreate it and then reassign it. Okay, so we added the thing. Model equals new view model.guestbook name. Equals guestbook.name model.previous entries equals guestbook.entries. Cool. Now we return the view with the model. Alright, it should work. So run the application, you should be able to add stuff. Alright, so Control F5. And we get our page, it has a form, we give it a steve@whatever.com, hello, Twitch peoples. Save that. And it didn't quite work, did it? Did we do a post? We did a post with a new entry email address, new entry message. Alright. What did I screw up here? If model state is valid, I wonder if it maybe isn't valid. I haven't specified anything that's required though. Fetch the repository, add the stuff. Oh, I didn't save it in the repository, that's why. Right? That's the line I missed. Update. Not sure that matters, because this really should have worked anyway, but we shall see. And you know, I've got the actual theoretically working code right here, which would tell me, hey, don't you do that. Anything else I missed? No, that looks right. So, should get rid of that. Let's go there. We are at the root page again. That, and save, and still nothing. Well, running should really add in, they should be at the top of the list. So accumulate, okay. Well, let's just debug it, shall we? So let's make sure we're hitting this. Oh, that's true, did I get that right? That probably has to be named properly. I give it a different name for no good reason. Might not be routing to the right place. Hey, look at that. Alright, but notice we nuked all the other stuff. Why is that? Because we didn't refetch it. Is that why? Guess entries. Why did we nuke all the other stuff? Guestbook entries, add. Oh, I know why. Because I didn't actually hit the thing from the home page the first time. Alright, watch this. We're gonna delete the database. We're gonna pull open PowerShell. We're gonna recreate the database. Boom. Alright. And we're gonna run the app. Alright, now at this point, these things ought to be in the database. And then this is still not going to work. It's only going to have one. Yeah, because that's literally what I just did. So, what else did I do wrong? That should be the new one with all the items now, right? It's almost like it's not using SQLite. Let's double check that. Am I using SQLite or am I using in memory? Add DB context. That's all good. App settings, connection string, default. That's not. Huh. That's not SQLite. Don't you need to call the new method of repository with the include? The include. Ooh, did I use the wrong one? Thank you. You're right. What does my lab show? It does not. Oh, it does right here. That's what I screwed up. Good, good. All right, thanks. Because I was about to go down a rabbit hole. All right, so yeah, so that needed to have that, and really I should have, you know, one place that I'm doing that, so I don't have that mistake. So thank you. That'll be something to watch out for. All right, so let's see now if that works. Good call, good call. All right, so there's all of my data. Sweet. We can do, you know, another message, and there it is. All right, now these dates aren't right, so let's make sure we fix that. I think back in lab 1, let's page up a little bit here, I missed a step where I should have done this. I needed to initialize datetime created to now. Because as you can see in my browser, it's not being initialized to anything. Because I skipped that. So that's my bad. Let's jump back up here to guestbook entry equal datetime dot UTC now. Build that again. Because we really want my messages to be at the top of the list, not the bottom of the list. So one more time. Again. And there it is at the top. Perfect. Okay. Back to the lab. We're finishing up lab 2. So include related data. We did that. The guestbook. We did that. We finally managed to actually copy this code correctly. Alright, so what does this say? Since we're using a real data store, test data will accumulate. Feel free to delete the database SQLite file anytime you want. If you do, you need to rerun the update script, which I just did. So that works. Cool. Alright, so at this point we would review some stuff and talk about problems with the design, because there are many. Is it testable? Is it following separation of concerns? The answer to most of these is no, it's awful. Do we have any model validation? Not really. Is there stuff you would refactor to improve? I hope so. Alright, so we would discuss this a little bit in the workshop. For the benefit of folks that are watching, some of the things that I would do, I've already mentioned a couple. One of them is pull this into a separate method, because I'm doing it in multiple places here, and I already got bit by it once because I didn't use the same call again. This was a late change in this lab, so it's only been around for a couple months, and I've done this lab so many times I keep forgetting that that's a thing, so that's why I'm missing that, but it'll stick with me once I do it a few more times. Other things are this seed code could probably live somewhere other than in the home page. If you hit the app without going directly to the home page first, like if I just do a post after I reset the database, it will not run this, and then it will never run it because it'll never come into this block. So if I want that sample seed data to be there, the only way I can do it is if I make sure I hit the home page first. Other stuff is, I really don't want to just be working directly with all this data stuff here inside my controller. And there's a few other issues like with the home page view model, which we'll talk about as we go forward. Okay, so if you were following along and you want to just make sure that you got to the right place for the next lab, here's some instructions on how you would do that. So you could go and say git checkout tag, in this case it'd be like 3.0 lab 3 start, and you would be caught up and ready to go with the lab 3 thing. So if by chance any of you are trying to follow along with these labs, you could actually follow or run these 2 lines, right? Just replace 2.1 with 3.0, which I should probably just make that the default. No, I think I was going to do that. Maybe I didn't. Check that. Page 7. Page 7, 2.1 should be 3.0. All right. Okay, so let's move on to the next lab. Now we're going to start notifying users. This is a longer lab of multiple steps. And we're going to talk about domain events. Now in the workshop I would talk about domain events for a good while, make sure everybody understood the concept, and then we would do this lab. I'm going to skip that part. I do need to have a test SMTP thing though. So let me go grab SMTP for dev, which I have in a utility somewhere in Dropbox. So this is SMTP for dev, if you haven't seen it, and it is listening on port 25. And so when I go to send emails, this is where they'll show up. They won't really send emails, which is really nice. If you've ever accidentally sent lots of emails to real customers when you were testing stuff, you understand the value of this. There's other ones that you can use that work the same, and there's, like I mentioned, there's a NuGet package that you can use too, or I'm sorry, a Docker container that you can use too. So I may play with that one too in a minute. All right. So our goal is to notify people that have previously signed the guestbook, but only within the last day. Also, I don't want to notify the person that just signed the guest book. They know they did that. They don't need an email. That's just noise. So we're going to first implement logic in a post action that we just wrote to loop through all the previous entries and send an email to any of that have been made within the last day. ASPNET Core 3 supports SystemNet Mail, so we can do that. If you're using an earlier version, we'll skip that. Everybody's using 3.0. I could probably even remove that. Yeah, that whole line could probably go away. So what are we, page 8? Page 8, remove mail kit. Okay. Add the following code just before you add the new entry to guestbook.entries in your home controller post method. You shouldn't send an email to the person who just signed the guestbook. That's why we're going to loop through the entities before we add the current message, the current entry. Alright, so here's the code we want, and we can actually copy paste it, I think. Let's see how well this works. Seems to want to copy a little too much, but we'll clean that up. So in our post, right before we add the entry, we're going to say that. Right, and then we just need a namespace for SystemNet Mail, and we should be good. Notice this is going to use localhost 25, which works because I've got SMTP for dev listening on that port. And so save that. And then manually test that your solution works using SMTP for dev or whatever. So here's SMTP for dev. Let's Control F5, run the thing again. Let's kill off some of these old instances. And we'll go deliver at somewhere.com, testing, and let me just pull this up so you can see both, and save. And notice it's sending emails to all those other things. And it got a format exception that something wasn't an email address. So that's something that we'll want to address as part of our model validation. Alright, but you can see that SMTP for dev worked, we got emails, so that's good. Alright, next in the lab, it says, what impact does this have on testability of the controller? Well, you might imagine that sending emails in the middle of your controller might make it harder to unit test. And just to demonstrate that real quick, let me show you one other thing. We're going to run this thing, there it is again. We're going to take SMTP for dev. We're going to say stop listening and go to foo@bar.com, something, save, and boom, socket exception. No connection can be made on port 25. So you can't test this thing if you don't have something listening on port 25, is the point that's being made here. Where in the solution does this business logic live? Well, everything right now is in the controller, so it's in the UI, obviously. How valuable is the current domain model in representing the logic? Well, the current domain model, guestbook and guestbook entries, doesn't do anything with this logic. It doesn't know anything about notifications or any of that stuff. So we would like to push this logic into the domain where it's more readily tested and it's not tightly coupled to the UI, right? So now we're going to refactor, and we're going to say, putting all this stuff in the controller is a smell, the controller's getting too big, let's move stuff into a service and go from there. So we can create an interface to represent sending email, call it iMessage sender, put it in core interfaces, have it implement something like this. Alright, so let's go here, let's go to core, let's go to interfaces, which I don't have, so we're going to add a new folder called interfaces. I'm going to add an interface. That's not what I want. What the heck did that do? What was that? Scope to this. Oh no, I don't want that. Add a new item, find interface, fail to name it correctly, make it public, and finally paste in this thing. Yep, that looks good. Take that and rename that so it matches. Sure, fine, whatever. Okay. Control dot that, and we're good. We have an interface. Check. Next, implement it in infrastructure in a new services folder, like email message sender service. Alright, sounds good. So I don't have an infrastructure service or services folder, so we're going to add a new folder, services, and we're going to add a class called email message sender service. We're going to make it public. If you forget that, it causes problems. And we're going to have an implement iMessage sender and pull in the interface from Clean Architecture Core Interfaces and control dot to implement the interface. Cool. Okay. So now we want to take this code that currently lives inside of our controller and put it inside of this service. So back here, find our controller. Got too many things open. Alright, controller is here. And we only want the part where we send the message, right? Message, yeah. So we want this block right here. Copy that, paste it into our new service, and then tweak it so that the to address is this, and the message body is this. Alright, now we just need a using statement. We should be in good shape. We can clean up what we're not using. Alright, so that passes. Now how are we going to use this thing? We need to inject it in the home controller and then retest that everything still works. So when we for each over all those entries, we want to send these emails using our service. So let's go back here to the controller, drag it over to the side where I can find it, we can pin it there. This is going to go away, but first let's inject our thing. So we can come up here, get iMessage sender, there, message sender, control dot to create an initialized field, and come down here and we're going to use that field. Message sender dot send notification email to entry dot email address with model dot new entry dot message. Alright, and that's what that was doing. So now we have eliminated low-level SMTP systemnet mail stuff from our controller, which is an improvement. Okay. Next step, encapsulate sending notifications. We want to pull the logic of deciding who should get a notification out of this action and into another service. Note this approach is better than leaving the logic in the UI, but it's not ideal because the functionality now for Guestbook is split between a service and Guestbook itself, making Guestbook anemic. There's literally no logic in Guestbook. We're going to fix that later. But for now, we're going to create a new iGuestbook service that goes in core interfaces, and it's going to have this record entry method. So let's just copy that, and we'll go back to core interfaces and create an iGuestbook service. So public interface iGuest service has this one method in it. We can move this to its own type, and then we can pull in any namespaces that it needs, like that. Alright. And everything's good. Now we're going to create a new class, Guestbook Service, in Core Services that is going to actually implement that interface. So Core Services exists. We're going to just replace this one here. We're going to call this Guestbook Service, inheriting iGuestbook Service. Control dot pull in the interface. Control dot implement the interface. Alright. And in here we're going to have the logic for what to do when we record an entry. So this is going to make it so that the controller has much less stuff in it. So this service needs to have a repository to access the guestbook. It needs to have a message sender to send the emails. And then in record entry, we're basically just going to take the logic out of the home controller and put it into this method. So if we go look at home controller, we'll see that it has basically the types that our service needs. So we'll come over here and just copy those over. And let's rename the file while we're at it. Okay. And then in here, we're going to do basically what we're doing inside our controller. So back to our controller, when we post something, we do all this, basically, I think. And so let's see what that looks like. No, actually, the guest book we're going to be handed to us, so we don't need to do that part. We do need to loop over its entries and then send the things. And this model.newEntry is just new entry. It's our parameter that's being passed. And same here. We'll save the entry and we'll update the guest book. Alright, so the only thing that we need to do still in the controller is fetch the guest book and then pass it into this one. I don't know why I implemented it that way and didn't actually have it fetch it itself, but that's okay. So we're going to inject the iGuestBook service in there and call record entry. We should be able to remove iMessageSender once we're done with this. So this whole for each loop down to the update is now going to be done by this service. So come up to the top, add another argument, iGuestBook service, guestbook service, control dot implement field, guestbook service. We're still going to do that part, but we're going to remove this part. I'm going to say guestbook service dot record entry, and here I need to pass it the guestbook and model dot new entry. Okay, so our post method got big there for a minute, but then once we got it working, now we're cleaning it up. So this is like get it to work and then make it right. Alright, so let's build that one more time. And it says, somewhere it says we should test it. Okay, down here it says we should test it. Alright, so you should be able to remove iMessageSender. So let's do that. Short-lived intermediate refactoring. But you notice our IDE is telling us it's not used anymore. That's why it's gray here. So it's helping us out and saying, you know, you're not using this, you can get rid of it. Which we should definitely do. Alright, now we can test this one more time. Bring it up. It's going to cause problems. At whatever.com. I'm going to have to recreate the database because it's got bad emails in it. It's going to keep giving us errors. But we'll start listening and we'll save. And we should see emails being sent until it hits the one that I added that's bad. Alright, so while I'm thinking of it, let's go ahead and take care of that problem. Database, delete, and PowerShell. Let's run the migration EF database update again. Gives me a new empty database. And then just to make sure we seed it with some stuff, we'll launch the home page, and there we've got some test data again. Alright, now back to the lab. Test it, should work as it did before, controller method should be much smaller now, blah blah blah. Alright, there's what record entry should look like in there. That sounds about right. This is close to what we did. Oh, we don't need that anymore. And let's see. Yeah, that can change. I need a new screenshot for this because that's an image. So page 10, screenshot, update. Because this clear and add range junk, this is stuff we had to do when we were using the in-memory database. It had problems with using it the way you would expect. With SQLite, it works the way you would expect, though. All right. So that brings us to step 4, use a domain event. We're going to eliminate the need for a service that only works with the one entity. Domain services, normally you only want to have those for things that work with multiple entities, right, and kind of orchestrate between them. If I have logic like recording an entry on a guestbook, that belongs on the guestbook. There's no reason to put that in a separate service. Now, why wouldn't we just put that on there? Let's go look at guestbook for a second. Hey, Fishing Dev, how's it going? Good afternoon. So here's guestbook, right? Now, I've already gone and done all the work of creating a guestbook service, but I didn't really talk about why. In the workshop I would. But the reason is that this guestbook service needs stuff, right? It needs dependencies. In order to do this record entry behavior, I need to actually send messages somewhere, and I need to persist stuff. And so when I would try and do that on guestbook, it's going to be really hard for me to do dependency injection because this is an entity, and the way I get this entity is from my ORM. It's from Entity Framework Core. If I give it a constructor, and I tell the constructor that I need an iMessage sender and an iRepository, it's going to blow up when Entity Framework tries to create it. Entity Framework doesn't know how to inject those things. I suppose an interesting thought exercise would be to modify Entity Framework so it could do dependency injection on entities, and that would be kind of cool, actually. But as it stands today, that's not a thing. And so you have a few options. Option one is take all the dependencies and make them method arguments and do parameter injection. Right? So that would look like this. I could say public void record, or let's just say add entry, and it would need all the things that it needs now, plus it would need, you know, an iMessage sender, and an iRepository, and then whatever else it needed, right? Now the thing about this too, though, is that whatever's calling it now has to pass in all those things. So instead of just calling record entry on something and passing in the parameters you think it needs, you also now have to know about all the stuff that it needs to do its under the covers work, right? Its dependencies. Whereas right now, I can get this guestbook service, and this code has no idea that guestbook service needs an iMessage sender, right? It's not relevant to this code. But if I use parameter injection, now all of a sudden I have to have that here. At this line of code, I have to know about an iMessage sender, which means that my controller has to know about it, right? And suddenly my controller has to know about every dependency of every single entity or thing that I work with, and this grows up out of control, right? So that's not necessarily a great solution. And so if you're not going to inject it into the constructor of guestbook, and you're not going to pass it as a parameter, another option would be, well, a couple more options. You can do service location, which is like basically global state, and it's kind of frowned upon. It's considered an anti-pattern, where I would just go out to the IOC container and look it up directly inside this method. Would prefer to avoid that. Or I could have property injection, right? So I could have a property on guestbook that is an iMessage sender or a repository, and then I have to just make sure I set those properties somewhere, which is important and easy to overlook and frequently causes bugs. So now your guestbook might or might not have properties set that it needs in order to do certain actions, and so your code becomes very brittle because you don't necessarily know if you're in a valid state. So those are all bad, right? So let's talk about a way to do it in a good way. The good way is domain events. Domain events are a way for me to perform some actions on my domain model, and if they have side effects that require dependencies, I can do those in handlers that are separate from the entity itself. So the entity is able to raise events that then other handlers deal with the dependencies. So let's read through here again. We're going to create a new domain event for when we add an entry. It's going to inherit from base domain event. We're going to include in it the entry that we just added and the ID of the guestbook. Those are the only things we need. And then we're going to modify guestbook to give it an add entry method. Okay, so I'm already halfway there on the add entry method. Let's just finish that so the compiler is happy. Like that. All right. Now let's go in here and look at these events. And we're going to create a new class called entry added event, I think. Base domain event. Something like that. Base domain event, entry added event, yep. And it needs a guestbook ID and an entry. All right. So we're going to pass those in. So it needs an int guestbook ID, and it needs a guestbook entry, new entry, and that's going to be a property. and that's going to be a property. And those can just be get only, and I want them to be above, I think. I guess. Alright, so let's see how close does that look to what I wanted here. I guess I put them below here. Whatever. Duplicity entry, okay. That looks right. Alright, now we'll put that in its own file, and we'll call that done. So now, under guestbook, what do we need to do? We need to add the entry to our list of entries. So when we add an entry, we say entries.add entry. Now at the moment, there's nothing to prevent anyone from just modifying this collection directly, because it is just a list. We'll deal with that later, but that is a known problem. Alright, and what else did our instructions tell us to do? Create a new event, change entries to make it harder for clients to manipulate directly. Yeah, we're going to do that later. Create a guestbook notification handler. Alright. I'm doing this out of order. Add a new thing that adds an entry to entries. No, I'm not. Alright. Create a new and add it to, that's the part I'm looking for. So we want to do that step. Create a new entry, add an event, add it to the events collection. So here, we say events.add. Events is a collection that lives on base entity, and we'll see what that does in a minute. But now we're going to say new entry added event, give me the namespace, and this is going to use my ID, and then this new entry. Alright, so that solves that step. Now we're going to create a handler in core handlers and have it implement iHandle entry added event. So where's handlers? We already have handlers. And we create a new handler. Do I call it something? What am I calling it? Guestbook notification handler. Guestbook notification handler implements iHandle of T, where T in this case is an entry added event. And now we're going to implement that interface. Alright, inject an iRepository and an iMessage center just like guestbook service, because you know what, this is going to look a lot like guestbook service. So we'll take all of this and put it in here. Get rid of that. And change this to this. And pull in a namespace. And put this in its own file. And now that's all set. Alright. Realize we missed a requirement. Only send to guestbook signers who signed within the last day. We haven't actually been doing that. Unfortunately, our test data was all within this day, but we can add some older test data and verify that that works. So we're going to exclude the entry that was added and only send things to people that have signed in the last day. Copy the logic from guestbook service. So guestbook service here has just a for each for notifying people. In fact, that's all we want to do is the notifications here. So here's our notification handler. You're async, aren't you? Let's see what that's supposed to look like. It was void. Why are you async now? Oh well, we'll just have it return a task.completed task. That should make it happy. Alright, so for each thing in guestbook.entries, I need to get the guestbook, so I do need that fetch part. Actually, I need it from home controller. So in home controller, I have code for looking up a guestbook, which this handler can do. Now, if you're following along at home, you may be saying, hey, you might be loading this thing from the repository multiple times. That's not very efficient. But the good news is that if Entity Framework already has this guestbook in memory, because I loaded it up for the controller or for something else, then this call does not make a database call. This call just fetches the thing that Entity Framework already knows about. All right, and this becomes domain event dot new entry dot message. All right. Now I could have passed in an instance of the guestbook itself to the domain event, and that would have been fine too. In this case, I decided to just pass in the ID and let it fetch it if it needed to. All right, so back to our lab here. We didn't actually do this bit yet, and that bit. Update home controller post method to call guestbook to add entry, and then save it afterward. All right, so let's just steal the code that's already here for how to do the date stuff. So we're going to say, just pull this over to the side, and instead of just looping through all the entries, we're going to fetch just the emails. So var emails to notify equals guestbook dot entries dot where entry dot date time created is greater than date time offset dot dc now dot add days -1. I guess I need some namespace. I need link. Go. Alright, so that's good. Now it'll let me add it. Alright, thank you. Alright, so that gives us the where clause. Date time offset. There, okay. So what this is saying is, give me all the entries where they're created more than a day ago, like since yesterday. And, by the way, the entry ID of the guestbook entry is not the new entry's guestbook ID. Now, right, if this were fired off immediately, then that ID would be 0, right, and it wouldn't actually work. But this gets fired off after it gets saved, so it will have an ID. Now, I don't want just the entries, I want just the email addresses. So now I'm going to do a .select and grab the email address. Okay, so that gives me emails that I want to notify. Now I can just for each over the emails in emails to notify, and then in here I can just do that, right? And we'll give it a better name. I didn't have this somewhere earlier. Probably I missed it. But there we go. Now we have a message that's a little better than what we were passing it before. We'll pass it that. All right. Cool. Okay, so with this in place, if we get it to work and build and everything, we're no longer using this service. Just come back here and jump up and finish up these last couple steps. So update home controller post method to call guestbook.add entry and then save it. All right, so our controller is going to get super small. Come down here, we were doing all this work. Now we're just going to fetch this thing. Call guestbook.add entry model dot new entry, and then just save it. Repository dot update guestbook. That's it. I guess the view model stuff stays too. So, but we don't need the service anymore. Okay. So now notice this is gray. So we'll take that out. And it's not a question now if you're working with this model of, gee, do I work with the entity or do I work with the service? So you don't have that question. You just always work with the entity. That's where the logic lives, right? Now it's not anemic. Now it's got logic encapsulated in it, which keeps our controller a little bit cleaner. Alright, so back to here, test it again. Let's see if this thing actually works. Okay, so we're here, we've got basic test data, just restored the database before. I want to make sure I only use real email addresses now, so things that look like email addresses anyway. And I don't know where SMTP for dev ended up, but seems to have worked. There it is. Alright, so that worked. Steve@whatever.com though. No, that's not this time. Alright, let me delete those. I just want to verify one thing. If I create a new entry and save, new entry should not get an email. And it does not, right? It sent to the other 4, but it didn't send it to itself. So that's working. Good. Okay. So now, I think we're done with that lab, pretty much. Let's see. There's all the notes. There's all the things. Guestbook service interface can be deleted. Guestbook notification handler does the same thing, but better. Alright, so let's go back here, and we can get rid of iGuestbook service. And we can get rid of guestbook service. Cool. Now we're going to do some tests, I think. Test. Demonstrate testability. Guestbook needs support mobile other apps that require an API. API is going to need a list entries and an add entry. So we're going to add a new API controller under API guestbook controller. And there's already a to-do items controller as a reference. We're going to add a method get by ID, etc. Okay. So in web, there's an API folder. So to-do items controller. We'll do something like this. Needs a get by ID that returns not found. Maybe I can copy that. Looks like that. Put it in its own file. Yep. And then, alright, we'll just do that one first. Alright, so step 3 is add an integration test for this in test/functional test. I should probably say functional test, just to match. Page 13, integration. Should say functional. Alright. Use the API to do controller list should as a reference point. Okay. So in my tests, which we haven't really looked at much yet, there should be a functional test for API for to item controller list, and should does not exist because I quit naming things that way a while ago. But nonetheless, we want to do basically this, but now for the guestbook. So this is what guestbook controller get by ID. So copy this. We'll call this guestbook get by ID. Alright, and we'll call it that here too. Now what this does is it gets a custom web application factory, creates an in-memory web server for our app, and then it gives us an HTTP client that is wired up and ready to talk to that thing. And so here, when we say get by ID returns guest book with items, I think, something like that. What's it going to say here? Implement that interface, inject it into there, initialize the HTTP client, add a test, add test data to web seed data in the populate test method. Test data method, be sure to use entries.add instead of add entry to avoid events. Add one guestbook with one guestbook entry. Alright, so we need to jump into seed data and add some test data. So seed data is here. Initialize, populate test data, here we go. First it removes them all, and then it adds them. I'm not sure we need to do the removal part, but we definitely need to add a new guestbook entry with an item. So down here, I'll just say our guestbook equals new guestbook. Name equals test. Guestbook dot add entry, new guestbook entry. Email equals test@test.com. Message equals test message. Alright. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do entries.add because it told me to do it that way. dbcontext.add guestbook. There we go. dbcontext dot save changes. Right? Alright, now that should populate our test data. And just to be safe, we'll add this for each too. I'm not sure I need it. Pretty sure I don't. But for each thing in guestbooks, if by chance it's already there, we'll remove it. Alright. So build guestbook. Write a test that confirms 404 occurs when expected, and that you get a valid entry when one is supplied. So the 404 test is pretty straightforward, right? We're going to come back to our guestbook controller get by ID. We're going to fetch API slash guestbook slash get by ID slash or just ID. API guest, okay, there's no get by ID, just API guestbook slash number, alright. That's easy enough. API guestbook number. So, returns 404 given invalid guestbook ID. Like that. We'll $sign that. And pass in guestbook ID, or even better yet, invalid ID, and we'll just say int invalid ID equals -1. Alright, so that should give me a 404, which means I don't want to ensure a good response code. I want to say assert.equal response.status code is the thing I'm going to get, and I want it to be HTTP status code dot not found, something like that. What do you call it? Alright, HTTP status code, yep, that looks good. Alright, and I don't need the rest of this, but I am going to need it in a moment for the next one, so for now I'm just going to comment it out. Alright, so let's see if we can run this test. that injected. So steal that code real quick. Now we can build. Okay, so now let's find my test. Oh, that's not it. This test. Right click, run tests. And it passes. See the green check mark? So we're good. Now our lab says, next, write a test to confirm the guestbook and enter return correctly when a valid ID is supplied. Now just to be sure that it's the right ID, I think I could specify an ID in here. I had to do that when it was using in-memory provider, but I think I don't need to do that now that I'm using SQLite. So let's just go on faith that it's going to give this thing ID 1, and we'll see if that bites us. I don't remember. This thing is probably using an in-memory provider for tests. So there's in-memory database, there's in-memory data. So it is using in-memory provider. Yeah, we'll just write a test, we'll see what happens. So I'm going to copy this test and give it a new name. Returns just put and entry given valid ID. And we'll call this valid ID of 1 and valid ID. And now I don't want to look for a 404. Now I do want all this other stuff. Alright, so we want to make sure we have a valid status code. Our response is the string. Our result is deserialize the result into the type we expect. In this case, guestbook. And there's not going to be a list, but that gives me a guestbook. And then I can assert things like test as guestbook.name, or result.name. And that should be what we said in seed data. Yep. And then, like, normally I would move these to constants, but for now we'll just leave them the way they are. Result. Just keep doing assert equals. Test.test.com, result.entries.first.email address. And then, what was that? Test message. Capitalized. Dot message. Good, alright. I could probably even check the count on the entries, but that's probably good enough. Alright, so let's run this, see if it actually works. And it did. Look at that. Green check. First try. Awesome. I was expecting it to take longer. Nice thing about the in-memory thing is it's really fast. Alright, so let's just for fun run all our tests. Make sure they all pass. Test. Find me live. No, it's not test. Find me the test explorer. There we go. Everything passes. So we're good. I don't need that. Alright, so back to the labs. Run all your tests. There should be 12 of them now, he said. Is that accurate? That's probably 5 and 5 and there. It says 13 now. So what page is that on? 13? Page 13, 13 tests. Okay. And here's what those tests might have looked like. Yeah. So this was just testing that there was an entry. And this is doing a not found. Looks pretty much the same. Here's the seed data. I did add a 1 there at one time, but I don't think I need to now since it worked. Alright, and then 6, add a new API to record an entry to a guestbook. So now we need a post. Mesh should take a guestbook ID and a guestbook entry, return a 404 if no guestbook exists, return the updated guestbook if successful. Alright. So we could write this test first, but let's not get crazy on that. Let's just come over here and add a post. Post to the same endpoint, nice result, and entry. Yeah, that should work. Wants to take in an ID and a guestbook entry from body. From body means it's just going to be JSON coming in on the body. Guestbook entry, new entry. Alright, we're going to fetch the guestbook. If it's null, do that. Otherwise, guestbook.add entry, new entry, and repository.update guestbook. Easy peasy. Return the updated guestbook if successful. Yep. And an integration test for this new entry API method. Did I call it new entry? I called it add entry. Call it new entry. Fine. And over here, guestbook controller, copy that. And this is new entry. Okay, write a test to confirm the 404, write a test to confirm and create the thing. Alright, so this is the same except now it's a post async. And to see an example of a post, do I have a post example? Not sure I do. Because this thing needs to take in more stuff. So what do I tell you here? Say anything about how to do a post? Basically I need to get the payload for the post in there. So the sample code is right here. So alright, so we just have to type it in, which is fine. Alright, so returns 44 given invalid guestbook ID, that's fine. There's my invalid ID. Yeah, I still just need the content. So the content's going to be the same either way, so I can pull that out into a helper method. Post equals new email address equals test.com. Message equals test. So that's just a new anonymous object. And then our JSON, we need to serialize it. Content, new, string content, JSON convert, that's serialized object, entry post, comma, encoding dot, UTF-8. Application like JSON. Alright, so that's all that stuff I need to copy out of the lab manual. And then we're going to say client post async to that invalid ID, comma, JSON content. And we can, yeah. Alright, and my sample code on page 16 is not async. Page 16, update screenshot. So that does not look quite right. Alright, see, this is doing this dot result thing, and it ought to be doing an await, which is what my code over here is doing for real now. Alright, so that should run. Let's see, this one we can ignore for 1 second. And let's see, this should still work. Nope. I don't know what that's doing. Can I just build? Build works. Alright. Something must be locking a file. Alright, test worked. It failed, but it ran. And message is not found, but actual was method not allowed. Alright. So I've screwed up my controller somehow, and it's telling me method not allowed. Let's start by just looking at my code compared to my lab code. My lab code said return 404, give an invalid ID, do all these things, call into /new entry. I didn't do that. So, guest book, invalid ID, whack, new entry. So that's part of my route. Let's try that now. I thought it was weird that I was trying to post right to the root. Alright, cool. Because that only works on home controller index because it's a default. But now this passes. Alright, so now the second part is that it actually works when I want it to. So here, I still want this JSON content. Private string get entry as JSON. Do that and put these two things up in here. And then these two lines I want to keep. To do this. Okay. Oh, it's not a string, is it? It's a string content. There we go. Perfect. Invalid ID there became valid ID. Valid ID is 1. We're going to do all this. We're going to convert it into, well, it's not going to be a guest book this time. And just make U of R. Let's make U of R. Good. Right, so it's going to deserialize into a guestbook entry, and we can assert that the guestbook entry has whatever values we put in here. So just to make that easy, we're going to say private string test email address equals to@bar.com, just to be different, and private string test message equals test message, whatever. Alright, and then this, well, these are private, so they should start like that. And then test email address would go here. Test message would go here. And when we actually post this thing, we want to verify that we have a test message in result dot message and a test email address in result dot email address. You guys are not a very talkative group today. You can ask me questions if you want, or give me comments, or cheer me on, or something. Alright, let's run the test one more time. And it fails. Fails. I just don't know what I'm doing. Alright, so what's this say? Response test code does not indicate success 404 not found, because I said to go find number 1, and it's probably not number 1 anymore. And it's probably because my seed data did not specify that it should be number 1. We don't want to distract you since I'm in dev mode. I'm just following instructions from a document. But I appreciate it. But yeah, feel free to chat. All right, now you're still locked in on something. What just got that locked? It's weird. Intermittent failure. Well, now it works fine. All right, and then let's run this test again. Now that I'm specifying in the seed that it's going to be a 1, there's a 50-50 chance that'll fix it. Nope, not this time. Interesting. So when do you call the seed method? This custom web application factory goes in here and calls seed data. After I get the app DB context, I store that in DB. DB says ensure created. Okay, so that'll create the database if needed, which is going to be in memory. And then it's going to populate the database. The seed data is going to call, and it's going to remove the stuff that probably doesn't even need to be removed. Guestbook it's going to add. Alright. API, guestbook, valid ID. That looks right. Alright, this might not be the ID actually. This might be that I didn't do that bit correctly. So let's go back and look at the guestbook controller. I did call it new entry. My base API controller should specify the route as API controller what? I think if I look at my code, it's going to tell me that I needed to give it a better thing here, like maybe whack new entry. How much you want to bet if I go look at my code, it's going to have that in there. Look at that right there. Haha. I know what I'm doing. Okay, so ID int / new, yeah, that's the actual issue. So this route needed to be more explicit. You can set up a default route in your API controller that will automatically map to the action, and all I would have to do in that case is specify the action in here somewhere. I could say like whack action, for instance, but then I'd have to put the ID at the end. Like there's no way to easily tack the ID inside of that. And so since I want the ID to be next and then the action after it, I have to do it here at the method level. Alright, so let's see if that actually fixes the bug. No. Response status code is not 405. Method not allowed. What? Method not allowed. You tell me I can't post. No, that's getting more interesting. Oh, yeah, duh. Because I didn't make that a post. See, now if you guys were watching, you would be telling me these things. Alright, now will it work? Still no. Expected foo@bar.com actual null. Response. I do return the thing from the controller, don't I? Return OK, guest book entry. Not that. Yeah, that should be the entry. I think. Is that what I want, or do I want to return the whole guest book? This one does return the whole guest book. Okay, so I am returning the guest book. In that case, I just need my test to look for the entry, not the result is going to be a guest book. Now, which entry is it though? Probably last, if I had to guess. there. Getting warmer. Run the test. So when this test runs, it should already have one entry. I'm going to add another entry, and there it is. It worked. All right. Cool. Where does that leave us on the lab? Since it's just past 2 o'clock, I don't have a ton more time left for this. Here's what the test might have looked like here. This one did a contains, cert contains. That might be a little less brittle than testing last, especially if I run the tests in parallel. And that would be alright. And the other thing this does that I like is that the message is a GUID. So when you know it contains that message, you're sure it's this message that we just added. So that might be something to add. Reconfigure so it doesn't replace the domain event dispatcher. Ensure that when you add a new event to your guestbook, notification always sends an email. And make it so it uses a fake implementation. What language is this? C#? Yeah, this is .NET C# code. Looks a lot like Java if you're familiar with Java. Okay, filters is another lab that's kind of easy at this point. So let's see. In the previous lab, the API container wrote 404 whenever you provide an ID that doesn't fetch a guestbook instance. You can imagine a real application, this kind of behavior will be very common and repetitive. So if we look at our guestbook controller, you can see this call, and you can see this call, and basically every other method that we might put on here, if it's going to manipulate the guestbook, the first thing it's going to do is try and look up the guestbook, and we don't want to have this repeated code in here. All right. So I think this will be the last lab that I do before we wrap it up for today, but this one's pretty quick. What we want to do is add a filter, and you can see there's already a filters folder here inside of this clean architecture template we started from. And if anybody wants to see the clean architecture template we started from, it's here. So I'll throw this since a bunch of you joined later. Here's the code we started from. We're working through labs, creating a guestbook using domain-driven design patterns. And we're about done here in a few minutes. So the last thing we're going to do is use filters to make it so that we can enforce policies in our API and also just eliminate duplication, follow the dry principle. And so to do that, we're going to add a filter to verify that the guestbook exists with whatever ID. Okay, so we're going to add an action filter that does that. We're going to put it inside this filters folder. We're going to add it with an attribute on our controller or at the method level, either way. And then that's going to do this check for us, and we won't have to do this check on every call. All right, so let's go back to our lab manual and make this a little bit bigger and easier to read. Okay. So, all right. This behavior is common and repetitive. It's important, especially for APIs, to be consistent. So you want to pull this out into a consistent location so you handle it the same way every time. Make it a policy. So we're going to add a new verify guestbook exists attribute to web filters. And I have a repo here, which I will gladly share with y'all, that has some examples of filters that we're going to work from. Specifically in this case, though, we are going to inherit from type filter attribute, and we'll go from there. So let me pull something up on my other monitor so I have something to work from. Verify something exists. Validate. There we go. So what are we calling this? Verify guestbook exists attribute. So we go in here. Say public class verify guestbook exists attribute inherits from type filter attribute. Put that in its own file. No. Let me put it in its own file. There we go. That. And now in here I want to create a constructor. I'm going to have that chain to its base type. The base type filter attribute expects a type. We're going to pass it type of, and then a new verify guestbook exists implementation, and that's all we're doing here. Now that thing doesn't exist yet, so we're going to put it as a nested class, public, or maybe it could be private. Yeah, it could be private. Private class that inherits from iAsync action filter. Okay, and then it can take dependencies. So we want it to have that repository. So we'll give it an iRepository. And initialize that. Okay, now it has to implement this interface. And there's that on action execution async. And we're going to do whatever we do, and at the end we're going to say await next. Alright, so up here, this needs to be an async task. There we go. Alright, now let's go back to my lab. Inherit from this, have a constructor that does that, create a private nested class that. Do I want to call it that? I guess we'll call it that. Verify guestbook exists filter. Okay. Give it the proper name. Alright, and then what? Have it implement that, inject that, implement that, and then do our check. So in here we're going to do this code. Alright, so here we say if context dot action arguments contains key ID, so it's going to be the guestbook ID if that's in there, and I'll say furthermore var ID equals context dot action arguments ID as an int, and if ID dot value got in here. Now we're going to go and see if we have this thing. So await. Is it async? I'm not even sure it's async. Yeah, I think it is. Async. Yeah. Await repository dot get by ID guestbook ID value. I just need ID, but pretty sure this will return null if it's not there. Get by ID, this is synchronous, so there's no await there. That's fine. So if, let's just do this, var guestbook equals this. Alright, that's easy enough. And I think that returns null if it's not there. It doesn't return a 404, obviously, but let's go look at it. EF repository, get by ID, singular default. Default's going to be null. Alright, so it's going to return null. And so here we'll say if guestbook equals null, then we're going to have a result set on context. So context dot result equal new not found object result ID dot value return. Okay, so what does this thing do? This is going to short circuit the call to that action method. If I have this attribute applied, it'll make it so that I don't need to do that 404, right? So when I run all these tests, and we look at these functional tests, and we can see that we have tests for things like returns 404 in this case, and this other one here. There's an expand all, isn't there? Collapse all. I want to expand all. Right, so there's a 404, there's a 404. There's a couple 404s on guestbook, okay? And we said we implemented them now by hand with this stuff. So when I rip this out and I rip it out here, I should expect that my tests are going to break, right? So we come back over here and we run these tests. I should get 2 failures for those 404s. And we do, right? That 404 failed, that 404 failed. Instead it got a no content because it's returning a null. Alright, so now this verify guestbook exists attribute, I can put where I need it. So I can add it here. And make sure I pull in filters. And I can copy that and place it here as well. And then run our tests again, and it should fix them, if it works. And everything's green again, right? So that worked. Then the last thing you can do is if you need it for every single method, which in this case I'm pretty sure we will, and for now we definitely do, you can also rip it off of the actions and just put it one time on the whole controller. And that should work as well. Alright, now if this were an actual workshop, I would ask a question right about now and say, hey, does anybody see anything wrong with this? And for those of you that aren't really paying attention, let me show it to you one more time. So we have guestbook controller. We go look up these guestbooks with an ID. And what we used to do is do an if check right here and say, hey, if this thing's null, throw a 404. But now, we have an attribute. The attribute's going to fire before this code runs. And the attribute looks like this. And the attribute says, hey, go try and look up that guestbook. And if it's null, then do the thing. Tony Davis, you get the prize. All right, so there's 2 get by ID calls right here. All right, I'm going to call it here inside the attribute. And then I'm going to call it again right here inside whichever action method. All right. Now, is that a problem or not? Is it going to make 2 calls to the database, or is it going to be okay? Nobody wants to say. Entity framework, since this repository is set up in my container with a lifetime that's scoped, it's only going to make 1 to the database. Yeah, Tony's got it. So I've got a single entity framework DB context and a single I repository instance. It's going to be the same instance here as in the attribute. And it's not that important that it's the same repository. The more important thing is it's the same DB context. Right? It's the same instance of this app DB context in both places. In the app DB context, once it loads that guestbook into memory inside of that DB context, if I make another call into it and I say, hey, give me this thing again, it will just give it to me, the one it already has. Right? I won't fetch it from the database again. Now that depends somewhat on how you implement your repository. So you want to test that to make sure that that's true. But if you're doing it the right way, then then that will be the case. Honestly, I think in this case, with this code as it stands right now, it's actually not true. I think it will actually make 2 calls. Because I think this call here will make 2 calls. I think if I wanted it not to, I believe I'd have to say return dbcontext.set of t. I think I have to use .find to change it. And we could find ID. Right? I think that would do the right thing. And I'm not sure why I picked one or the other. But that would be the one I know for certain this uses the identity map, which is what that feature is called in any framework. Whereas this one I think might actually make a separate call. In any case, either way, what you ought to do is implement your own caching layer in front of this anyway. And so if you have a cache layer that is basically a cached repository, it's called, then you would almost certainly hit your cache and you would not hit the database again. Hey, Mick Hogger, thank you for a follow. So if you want to learn more about cached repository as a pattern, which works on lists and things as well, not just on get by ID, pattern, I talk about it a bunch on my blog. So if you want to build a cached repository in ASPNET Core, here's a Here's an article that talks about it, which I'll put in the chat. And I think it's got a GitHub repo that goes with it that you can just steal and use. So, I can't see it. I thought I had a GitHub repo with it, but in any case, there's all the code there. Yeah, maybe I didn't make a repo for this one. Nope, there it is. All right. I should make that link more prominent on that post. All right, anybody have any questions? I've got to be done for the day here in a couple minutes, so I'm going to wrap this up. Anybody? Hope this was worthwhile for some of you that were watching. If you want to learn more, feel free to contact me. I can come in and do a workshop for your company, or some kind of private mentoring if you want. Come to one of my conferences where I'm going to give this. The next one is NDC London on Monday. Also Dev Intersection will be in Orlando in, I think, April, like April 1st and 2nd, something like that. I'm doing a workshop there as well. And so you'll see all the content that goes with this that will kind of give you the background of what it looks like. The last thing I suppose I should plug is my DDD Fundamentals course, which is getting a little bit old now. So Julie and I did it in 2014, I want to say. But it covers a lot of these concepts as well. No, I don't want notifications, Pluralsight. So check that out. And we are going to be redoing this course, June of 2014. Pluralsight doesn't like the fact that this is that old, so they want us to update it. So we'll be redoing this for .NET Core and more modern tech here, probably this year. They're looking at spring of 2020, because this is ASP.NET MVC 5. So it will be redone for ASP.NET Core 3.1. All right, that's pretty much all I've got. Let me see if there's somebody that we can raid here real quick. So raid somebody. Oh, how about good old Clarkio? I'm going to send you all over to Clarkio. Tell him I said hi. And I'll see you next week, or actually 2 weeks, because next week I'm flying back from London, so I'll be off next week. See ya.